Hey folks, welcome back to Junkie Wife Jr. On this episode, we've got a lot of finishing up work to do, a lot of loose ends. We've accomplished some big things, but it's time to get down to the time-consuming small stuff, the part that's not as fun, but has to be done so that we can have fun when it's all over. It's time to install the crankshaft pin on this crankshaft and harmonic balancer. Went ahead and pulled the old harmonic balancer off, and it's starting to look pretty weathered. I didn't want to reuse it. We're just too far into it to reuse that and risk the shell spinning. The crankshaft's not going to spin inside the balancer anymore because we are going to pin that. So we've got our new harmonic balancer here, and one thing that I did decide to do was tape it off and put just a red line across there with some spray paint. So if this outer shell, which is mounted on rubber to the inner shell, ever spins down the road, we'll know that our balancer is bad. Just as a real easy indicator, if this red mark doesn't line up with this one, it's time for a new balancer. So just a quick tip to make your life easier down the road. So to pin this harmonic balancer, Edelbrock sends this pinning fixture. So this has a step machined onto it here, which is going to locate right inside that harmonic balancer, locks it in place there. We're going to put this bolt down through it into the crankshaft, and then we use this drill bit, and they tell us in the instructions to mark it with a tape, piece of tape 1.7 inches from the end here, and we're going to drill that in there, and that splits the hole between the crankshaft and the harmonic balancer. Then we loosen the bolt in the middle, turn it the 180 degrees, and run a reamer through it so it cuts it out the exact size, and then we're able to take that fixture off, tap this dowel pin in there, and that balancer is not going to spin. And the reason we have to do that is because LS Chevys, unlike the previous small blocks and big blocks, they don't have a keyway in the crankshaft. They're just a smooth press fit. Well, with just the factory accessories, that's no big deal because there's not enough strain on it for it to actually spin. So the only thing that keeps it from spinning is the press fit and the bolt. Well, now that we're turning a supercharger that has a lot more force on the belt, we're going to have that pin to keep it from twisting on the crankshaft. Then we install our new bolt from GM, and it has the sealer underneath the head, so we don't have to worry about it leaking any oil out of there, and we'll be good to go. We got our alternator bracket installed. Remember, that locates our alternator further out and clocks the mounting position a little bit with those, adds the extra tensioner there. And we've got to take the supercharger back off the engine so that we can put on the new intake gaskets and get that torque down. We do have to make sure that this missing piece we finally got from ICT Billet, had to come straight from them, is going to fit and clear our AC compressor versus the throttle body area over here. So can't wait to get that all on there. This is the one that's specifically for superchargers, so it comes with 3 additional idlers, and a spring-loaded heavy-duty tensioner for the supercharger belt, so we don't have to worry about that slipping. We'll get that put on. Once we know it fits, we're going to take it back off, and I like to sand the bracket down and paint it so that we can have it gray to match the other brackets and accessories that we have. We've got to find a mounting place for this water pump for the intercooler system, so we're going to mount that somewhere. I'm not sure yet. Then we have to run the hoses to the back of the truck, which is a contradicting subject. People say, why are you running the hoses to the back of the truck? Well, that's where I decided to put the heat exchanger. So typically your heat exchanger would go in the grill area. There's not a lot of room in this grill though. We've already got our radiator, AC condenser, we've got a power steering cooler because this truck is hydro boost, so the fluid gets pretty hot. Did a few test drives initially when I built the truck without it, and the pump whines terribly, so we put a cooler on, fixed that problem. Over here we've got a ginormous transmission cooler, so there's no room left for a heat exchanger here without really cutting some stuff up, which I'm not a fan of. So let's take a walk all the way down here to the end of the truck. Long wheelbase, long bed, we're getting there, folks. So we put the radiator, also known as a heat exchanger, under the back of the truck. And a lot of people say, well, that's not going to work, that's not going to get enough air, it's going to crack and break when you have it mounted on the frame like that. Well, we're going to find out. All that stuff may be true, I'm not sure. We do have it mounted on rubber between the bracket and the radiator, and on rubber between the bracket and the frame on the front and the rear, so I'm hoping we'll be okay with that, and we'll see if we get enough airflow. If we don't get enough airflow, then we'll have to add some electric fans to it to keep everything cool. We'll see. It's kind of uncharted waters. I've never done one of these before, but I had all this extra area because the truck doesn't have a spare tire hanger, so I figured we'd put it to use. For some reason, if it doesn't work, well, then we can take it out and we'll put it in the bed. It can either go under the toolbox with some electric fans. If we don't care about the looks of it, we could put it on the top. We could scoot the toolbox back a few inches and we could put it in this gap with some fans. Of course, the bed's bowed like a banana because it's an old county truck, so why not fill in that area if we need to? So there's definitely some options there. I just went with one that I thought would be practical, putting it underneath the truck. We'll see what happens. You don't know till you try. There's no book written on this stuff. That sort of stuff is not in the instructions. You're not going to find it online. You just have to do what works best for your application. So we'll see what happens. So we've got our new AC compressor bracket installed. It's a tight fit, very close to the bottom of the snout on the supercharger there. Was really hoping that everything was going to work out, but folks, we've got to back up and do some serious work here. Not the end of the world. You know, we're doing something that is out of the ordinary. It's not designed for this application at all. And when Edelbrock uses the term universal for a supercharger, well, that's where we're at, and we're fixing to make it more universal. So one big problem is this idler right here. It's going to have to go on this bolt and it hits the bottom of the throttle body, so that's not going to work. We had to order some more parts. Your local idiot here doesn't really know what he's doing, and we had to back up and regroup a little bit. So earlier I showed you that we were going to run the ICT billet alternator bracket on the passenger side. It looked fancy, looked like everything was going to clear. Turns out it hits the throttle body, the bottom of the linkage where it rolls over when you open the throttle. We ground that as much as we could. Wasn't quite enough, so we had to take some more drastic measures. In no way, shape, or form is this a commercial or is anything paid for by ICT Billet. It's awesome to have a company like ICT Billet on hand because they make some amazing products, and all these issues that I've had with the bracketry and pulleys, they've been able to fix it. I was being hard-headed, I admit. I wanted to use this AC compressor. We already had it and it worked fine. In my redneck mind, there's no sense in changing it. Don't fix it if it's not broke. Well, I had to face reality, get over it, and we're gonna have to change that. So now we have the ICT bracket. I was calling them, told them all the situations I was running into. They didn't have another bracket to move that any further out, and he says, well, punch in this part number in the website. So I punched in this part number right here, and he says, we just came out with that one a week ago, see if that'll work for you. Looking at the dimension sheet that they have online, I believe it's going to work. So this no longer uses our big bulky R4 style compressor. This takes the peanut style sand-in compressor, and that bracket is going to go right down here underneath of the water neck, in between the frame rail and the engine block, and it's going to use the factory 4 rib on the harmonic balancer, so it has its own belt just for the AC compressor. Then this 6 rib can run everything else. So keeping our fingers crossed that the AC compressor is going to clear. We may have to do just some minor notching on the frame for the AC compressor, but we'll find out momentarily. And without having our AC compressor up top, now we're going to need a new belt tensioner. So thankfully, once again, not a commercial for ICT Billet, but the one that I had already purchased, and I loosely put it on here with a few bolts. They said, no problem, send it back to us and order the correct one, and we'll just exchange the difference. Couldn't ask any more. Wonderful company to deal with. And when you deal with mom and pop companies like ICT Billet, they take care of you. Their products are made in USA. Even all of these nuts and bolts that come with every kit they have, the nuts and bolts are made in the USA. So love supporting the United States of America when we can, anytime we can. And we're gonna start bolting some parts on here and see what we can do. So the new tensioner assembly is gonna go right down in here. That opens up this whole area, so we have nothing to interfere with the throttle body. We do have to put on their throttle body adapter, because now that we have our AC compressor out of the way, yes, we're gonna run the small 78mm neck on the supercharger and adapt it to our larger 90mm throttle body. I know we talked about cutting this off. If I had to, I would. I really didn't want to cut a brand new high-end piece like this from Edelbrock. Even though they said it was okay, they said if we open this up or cut this off and put a 90mm directly on here and eliminate this small opening, that would give us about 30-35 horsepower more. Well, we're not going for max effort here. Would it be nice to have that extra power? Absolutely, but this is the practical side of things. We're gonna make it all work. Last night was a pretty late night. Wrestled with the supercharger for quite some time because I am running the spacers underneath the supercharger on top of the cylinder heads there to space it up some so we have enough room for all our accessories to clear, steam hoses. It was an earlier issue with the throttle body, knock sensors, valley plate, that sort of stuff. So we needed to have those spacers in there, and it took some work to get all that to fit. So the supercharger's looking really good. We've got it torqued down numerous times to make sure that those bolts are good and settled since they're so hard to get to. We've got the injectors plugged in, fuel rails on, the intercooler hose assemblies, we've got those installed. And one little thing I wanted to show you guys how tight of a fit all this stuff is. So when before the fuel rails on, when you're torquing down these bolts, Edelbrock has a notch cast right here into the supercharger for every bolt on both sides, so that you have room to come in here with a 1/4 inch drive and a universal joint on your shallow socket down there, just so this stuff can fit. It's a really tight fit, but when it's all assembled like this, it looks really clean and nice and neat, like everything's supposed to be there. Everything has a purpose. So very sharp install. We're getting this thing all buttoned up finally. Lots of odds and ends that I was telling you about. We've got our coolant hoses ran from the back of the truck at the radiator / heat exchanger all the way up the frame rail here. They come up to mount to the intercooler pump right down here next to the radiator. So we've got our wires run over here, our relay, our fuse hooked directly to the battery. So all that's ready to be filled up and turned on and circulate some fluid. We've got the throttle body on with the adapter. We've got a mile of clearance now everywhere because we don't have our AC compressor in the way anymore. We've still got to make a throttle cable bracket, our TV cable bracket for the 700R4 transmission. We'll have to build something in this area to hold those cables. I've got to go up to O'Reilly's in town tomorrow after I measure this belt so we can get that installed, and we'll be ready to turn all our accessories, including the supercharger. There's our ICT billet AC compressor bracket, mounted similar to the truck location as if it were on a 05-ish Silverado. It's got its own tensioner built into it there. A mile of clearance on the frame. Worked out really great. Can't thank ICT enough for having that brand new product that we were able to install in here that they just developed a week ago, and we've got it on this truck installed, ready to turn that AC compressor. We've got to have some AC. It's Florida, folks. I'm dying out here. It's just too hot for this mess. I don't know what we're doing. So we've got our wires all plugged in over here, coolant temp sensor plugged back in, extensions ran underneath of the supercharger snout over here for the IAC TPS. We've still got to get some sort of air filter mechanism on here. Our electric fans are back on. This thing's almost ready to rip. It is almost time to hear that Edelbrock E-Force made in USA supercharger whine. Thanks everyone for watching. That's it for tonight. We'll see you next time.